Welcome to Freya's Fairy Tales, where we believe fairy tales are both stories we enjoyed as children and something that we can achieve ourselves. Each week, we will talk to authors about their favorite fairy tales when they were kids and their adventure to holding their very own fairy tale in their hands. At the end of each episode, we will finish off with a fairy tale or short story read as close to the original author's version as possible. I am your host, Freya Victoria. I'm an audiobook narrator that loves reading fairy tales, novels, and bringing stories to life through narration. I'm also fascinated by talking to authors and learning about their why and how for creating their stories. We have included all of the links for today's author and our show in the show notes. Be sure to check out our website and sign up for our newsletter for the latest on the podcast. Today is part 2 of 2, where we are talking to Claudia Blood about her novels. After today, you will have heard about writing from a young age, overcoming writer's block, dealing with negative reviews, trying to make sense of your dreams, finding your audiobook narrator, learning how to promote your books, making sure to keep your story trucking along, not bogging it down with the details with an info dump, and flying by the seat of your pants. To a point. Ravenne, Renegades Rising. A brilliant scientist? A tragic mistake? Can she save what she's already lost? Ravenne has worked hard to see the launch of Horizon, the first light drive, come to fruition. But her laser focus on the big day leads to tragedy when her daughter is caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. When Ravenne discovers the truth behind the accident, she seeks vengeance against the company at fault, and is given an impossible choice that leaves her on a year-long flight to deep space. Lonely, despondent, angry, Ravenne is lost. Until she discovers a video that seems to show her daughter being saved by a mysterious figure on that fateful day. Confident the message she receives is from her future self, Ravenne sets out on a mission to invent time travel and go back to change the past. Only messing with fate and time has unintended consequences. Ravenne must become the villain to be a hero. Ravenne is one of 4 interconnected novellas. The full arc of the story is resolved in the final novel. This novella ends in a cliffhanger. So we talked about before this that you have not figured out TikTok yet. What have you, or what are you scared of figuring out?
So I'm kind of a dork. I'm not gonna lie, right? Like I like Dungeons and Dragons, I like science, right? Like so I'm a nerd at heart, right? But I'm a social enough nerd to recognize that people look at me sometimes and they're like, wow. I get the pat on the head, right? Like,
Yeah.
wow, okay. So the TikTok thing is and I even have a girlfriend who did TikTok and then had such a horrible backlash that she left TikTok. Like she was one of those people who had thousands of negatives on her video for something that wasn't even like something she was focused on. And she's the sweetest, kindest little thing. And it like devastated her. So there's me socially awkward thinking about doing my little videos and thinking, what, like, the how's this gonna work, right? Like I'm just so afraid of like being live and just being a dork that everybody's, they're gonna pat me on the head and be like, yeah, no, you can't even talk. Like I'm gonna read your book. Like, whatever. So it's just the fear, I guess, of being too dorky.
Yeah, so I feel like every author that I've talked to has said that they're socially awkward. So there's
Because we're
that.
authors, right? Maybe.
I mean, I think it's just the fact that, like, you can't write a book with a bunch of people around you. You spend most of your
Right.
day in solitude. So it would
Right.
make sense that, like, that's what you're used to.
Yep.
Your friends are in your head, which sounds crazy because it is slightly crazy, but
It
you
is
all come up
slightly.
with amazing stories from it. So who cares? None of you have been committed for the stories you write. Stephen King, prime example.
Right. Not committed.
Not committed. Writes
Not
the most
committed.
disturbing books ever. But like I had because I work from home, so I'm a very chatty person, but I spend most of my day by myself with my 8-year-old, now 8-year-old.
Yeah.
So I'm like, my husband gets home and I'm like talking his ear off, but I don't do that in public most of the
Right.
time.
Right.
So I start the podcast and I'm like, oh, it would be great if on YouTube I could have this like behind the scenes situation going on. And then I'm like, that means you're
Oh
going to have a
no.
camera in your face while you're talking and messing up.
Oh, you're like,
And your
oh.
family knows about this. So you can't exactly be just like,
Right. And I'm so afraid I'm gonna say something that's taken the wrong way, right? Like, I don't in today's day and age, people seem just so angry about everything, and I'm just like, "But I'm not, like, I don't know."
yeah, there's part of it. I try to keep my nose out of all the drama because
Yes. I don't like drama.
most of the drama, I don't have a educated leg to stand on. So like it's better
Right.
just to stay quiet than to like say something that's completely wrong.
Yep.
But I feel like the people that people don't get mad about are the ones that find out they did something wrong, apologize, you know, from
Right.
a place of they are actually apologetic, not a, oh, I'm so sorry I made y'all mad. Like,
Right.
because there
Right,
are
which is
ones that
so
have
not an
done,
apology.
yeah, it's like it's not
Like,
sincere. As long as it's
right.
sincere, and then take this for authors, it would usually be you used problematic material in your writing of your book or whatever. That's
Right, or
usually an
whatever.
author's thing. Or you said
Right.
something
Right.
on social media that got you
Yep.
in trouble.
Yep.
But as long as I mean, there are some things that I've seen controversy over that should not have been said
I
at all.
know.
But
Yeah.
sometimes we write things and it's mostly you just don't know.
Right. Well, and
S-
there's also that whole thing, like, okay, so Ravine is an example, right? She's killed people. She has sent people to their death. She has done these
mhm.
terrible, horrible things. So for the record, I've never killed anybody. I have no plans to kill anybody. I have, right? Like,
I'm so
it's
glad
not
you
on my
clarified
list, right?
that.
Right. I'm not a serial killer, but she kind of is. So, but there's like taking it less dramatically though. So if you have someone who says something that is phobic or whatever, that's the character, right? Like, I don't like, woo, like, the character speaks. It's not necessarily a reflection of me. I'm not
Mhm.
going to kill people. So, right. So, whatever.
Right.
Right. So, I'm always also afraid that people are going to read this stuff and be like, wow, you are kind of a twisted little thing, aren't you?
Stephen King. Back to
And
Stephen King.
back to Stephen King. Right. Right.
I tell
So,
my husband, I'm like, I love true crime. I will listen to true crime podcasts, crime related shows, true crime related shows, like fictional and actual.
yeah.
Like I will listen and watch those all day long, but I'm like, I don't think I could write a book like
Right.
that because I feel
Right.
like it would put me in a really bad headspace
Headspace.
to be there.
Absolutely.
So I'm
Yeah.
like, fantasy, the book that I started that I stopped,
Yep.
is like sci-fi fantasy, same as yours.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's, that normal thing. Normal. A lot of people like those genres. It's all good. They're
It's
not
all good.
typically disturbing books.
Right.
So like we're good in this headspace. I get to make things up, set
Yep.
enough in the future, and you
Yep.
don't have to know about science in real life because you made it up.
Right. That's true.
Yeah, I don't think I could be in that headspace to write like he does and like other
Right.
authors
Other
do.
authors.
And I feel like I'm really good at puzzles, but I don't think I could make one. Like I don't think I could do
Right.
like a
That's the
mystery.
difference. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I'm
The
like I'm
whole
good at
like
solving the ending, but like I don't think I could make the
put up all
puzzle
the clues
myself.
and
Yeah.
everything that you'd have to do to weave it through. I thought I was going to be a horror writer. So I've been doing this long enough that it was before I had kids, and I thought I was going to be a horror writer. And then I had kids, and I can't, right? Like, I don't need that headspace. I can't get into this, like, what's the craziest, awfulest thing that could happen? Because, there's horror and there's no happy ending. I'm like,
Yeah.
ooh, I can't. I totally can't. Off topic before, did you ever see the Facebook where she reads about the murder mysteries and she does her makeup while she does it?
Uh-uh. Uh, you're talking Bailey Sarian?
Is that who it is? I just, like, I
She's
was
got
like,
black hair.
yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
And she do like these
Murder,
crazy
mystery, and
makeups.
makeup Monday.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I'm not a makeup person, but I watch her in like fascination that she's putting on this while she's talking
Yeah.
about murder.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
I've watched not her recent stuff because I added a lot of things to my calendar, but I
Yep.
watched a lot of her newer stuff prior to September of last year. So I've seen everything prior to September of last year, and everything since I've sporadically watched.
Sporadically. It's crazy how, but again, like I could never write that, but it's just fascinating listening to it and
Yeah.
watching her put on makeup.
Yeah. Well, and then there's so many like podcasts that are, I've had several people while I've been doing lives narrating audiobooks, people have been
Mhm.
like, oh, you should do a true crime podcast. And I'm like,
Mm.
when would I have the time to
Right,
research that?
right,
Like,
right,
I would need a
right.
team to do the research for me and
You
then I could
would.
read it.
Then you could read it. Yeah. But I don't know, would you, I mean, I would probably feel kind of bad if you're reading, you're like, "They did what?" Right? Like, "What? What?"
I want to do that a lot of times. So, like right now for the daily fiction, I'm doing Frankenstein. And for a
Oh,
lot of that, I want to be like stopping and be like, he walks into, he makes the monster. He leaves his room because he's afraid of the monster. He comes back and the monster's gone. And he's like, thank God. And I'm like, where's the
what?
monster?
Right.
Where did it go? That you're
Right.
not like, oh, I've let it
Oh.
loose into society. No, you're like, oh, thank God it's not
Oh
in my
thank
bedroom
God, let me
anymore.
lock the door now so it can't come back in.
But I'm just reading the story.
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
commentating on the
Yes.
story.
Which that might be an interesting like side, like to have the reading and then have you watching your reading and doing the commentary, pause. And this is the part I'm thinking, what the heck was he doing?
Yeah.
Unpause.
That would be a good YouTube one. Have the like
Right,
listen
right.
back. I feel like you need someone else to do that part though. Like I feel like it'd be weird to listen to
Ew.
myself
Just
and
say it's your
video.
twin, right? It's your evil twin. You're like your sarcastic twin.
I mean, I already narrate under 2 different names, so
There you go.
it's the
See?
other me, but
It's
my
the
family
other
knows
me.
about one and not the other.
Oh, it's
So
probably racy.
yeah, when I started doing fiction, I was using all of the nonfiction I did. So I started my first 5 books I did under my own name. And then I was like, we should probably use a pseudonym. So I start using a pseudonym. I did all the nonfiction, and then I get like tell the family about the fiction podcast and whatever. And then this year I start landing fiction, and the first one was like a nice, like sweet romance.
Yep.
But in talks with that author, she was like, hey, I have a book coming out that's going to be kind of like 50 Shades of Grey. And I'm like,
Hmm.
maybe we should not narrate this under the name
Yeah.
that people know about.
Right.
So
Because the two don't generally cross. I mean, I
Freya
read
was born.
everything. Yeah.
So then Freya, I mean, I read everything too, but like we're
Yeah.
talking about my mother-in-law's coming into town and I'm like, oh God, I gotta hide. I just got the Never King books. And I'm like, yeah, we're gonna hide those while she comes. Because I don't want to hear it. I mean, it's my house. I'm going to read what I want, but I don't want to
Right.
hear about it.
Right.
So-
Right. I don't want to be judged on my reading. I just want to read.
yeah. Yeah. So for the, and I had the first couple books were okay. And now I've done quite a few erotica books. And so I'm
Yep.
like, yeah, I'm glad they all know that I narrate. And most of them listen to the podcast, which is all classic novels. So I'm like, classic novels, you get a little more leeway.
Yep.
Plus, they
Yep.
didn't really write
But back
erotica
then,
ones back then. I mean, it
not
was
really.
different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, that's, we're relatively safe with those. Plus, they're classic. So what are you going to say
Right.
about a classic novel?
Right. Right.
But yeah, for this like new stuff, I'm like, ooh, I start one next week that's like, it'll be the spiciest one that I've narrated so far. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. The other one, comparing it to the previous erotica ones I did, I'm like, those ones should have been like spicy romance, and this one is definitely erotica.
Erotica.
I'm like, oh God.
But
Let's
it's
just be
popular
glad.
and people like it,
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah.
I don't know. It's for you, I'm sure it's a little bit weird because sci-fi is typically a male-dominated genre. Have you
Mhm.
had any, do people even know that you're a woman? Like, have you had any comments on, you're a woman, you can't write in this
No,
genre?
I have this is I'm in a Facebook sci-fi group that I really, really love, but there's this divide between the hard science fiction and sort of the softer science fiction. So as soon
Okay.
as you have any sort of fantasy elements or if the science isn't quite like up to spec, like I've got some things with like relativity and the way that time travel and time dilation and that kind of jazz and how it would work in the universe. But there's some things that, like, if a physicist were to read what I said, they'd be like, "You're so full of poo. The equations don't work that way," right? But
It's
but so
fantasy. I can say what I want.
exactly, and that's why. So I say I write science fantasy, and so on the book, the group, which is mostly men,
Hmm.
they're like, "Oh, so you write fantasy?" And I'm like, "Well, no, the science is there, so it is
Yeah.
a legit, it's science fantasy is a legit. Anne McCaffrey did it. It was, this thing, and well,
Well, and
no,
when
so
you're
it's
on
not really
Amazon
science,
too, they're like when you're, going
right?
down
It's
from
science fiction
books,
fantasy.
sci-fi fantasy is a
Yes,
heading.
yes. So that's the only thing that I've had is sort of a, if you don't write hard sci-fi, then you're not really writing hard sci-fi, is
Yeah.
what I've gotten. But I've never gotten. I mean, I work in IT, so it's a male-dominated society. I'm used to, guys,
Yeah.
and I can give it just as well as I can take it. So I don't care.
Yeah, it's like, why don't you just focus on your book and I'll focus on my book and we'll just, stay
And
in
we'll
our own
just,
lanes.
yep, and it'll be fine. And you write hard sci-fi, great. I don't.
I couldn't my husband listened to the audiobook for Moby Dick and or
Okay.
was it Moby Dick? No, it's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Okay.
And he had
Jules
only
Verne? Yeah.
yes, and he had
Okay.
only like read the abridged version previously. So he's listening to the unabridged audiobook and he's like, I had
Oh.
no idea there was so much science in that book.
Oh, in that
So
book.
yeah, he's like, there was, I don't remember how long he said, some ridiculously long time of them just going over science and stuff of this,
Yeah.
submarine and all that.
And you can't in today's days and you can't do that really. I'm like, because I
No.
mean, you're going to lose readers. You
Yeah.
have to. It has to be as good as it can be and as understandable as possible without bogging it down.
And a
It's
pretty
almost as
good
bad as
pace to it.
backstory, right? Like you don't want to dump the two paragraphs of and 2,000 years ago, blah 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 happened, right? Like that's not gonna the same way you can't say, okay, so here's how time dilation works. You kind of like.
You have to breadcrumb it like little
Bread
bits as you go.
exactly, or
This is
just enough so
relevant
they get
right
it.
now. Like this
Yes,
is relevant for this part right here, so I
yes.
have to drop it so this makes sense.
This makes sense because she, Ravine, in this, the book that's about to come out, she takes an almost fast as light drive.
Hmm.
And so that means she's going like 99% of light, which means her time is shorter than what the rest of the universe is. And the equation works out to be about 1 year of her traveling is about 22 years for Earth.
Hmm.
And so I had to kind of explain that that's just kind of part of the science and going almost as fast as light and, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, and keep it consistent and just like remind them of the fact so they're not like, wait a minute, how come 22 years goes? Well, because she's going almost as fast as light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, and this is why.
And this is what, but I don't want to like, I'm not going to put the equation on the book. Well, first of all, I wouldn't be able to solve for it. And second of all, like, woo, people close that book so fast and throw it.
So I had to somewhat science for the book that I stopped writing. It's like I don't remember what COVID number I gave it, but it's like COVID, like say 30.
Yeah.
And they're like, there's this disease that's around and no one has been able to come up with a vaccine. And so they're like, have come up with this thing that accidentally gives people superpowers. And so,
Yes.
like, in all of this, I'm like, I don't want the entire world to have superpowers. I want it to be
Right.
like a pretty small percentage. So I'm
Right.
like, what percentage of the world, and I'm not going to tell what
Right.
my thing is, I don't want to give it away because I will eventually work on this book. But I'm like, I need a small enough percentage, like, 1% or less of the world's population, ideally. So I'm like, what
Yep.
percentage of the world has done this? Okay, now let's, narrow that down a little bit. So people have had this done. What percentage of the world has had this done? Like, just
Right.
bring it down to
Right.
a
How many they're
reasonable number.
redheaded, who've been exposed to this chemical, who live on a farm, who yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then it's, I guess it's kind of the mystery aspect because then they can't figure out why. So they have, like you would do with the vaccine, they've tested it
Right.
on a certain, group.
Yep.
I don't remember how many people it was, but only 2 in this group end up with some kind of power. So they're like, well, what's the commonality between us that we don't share with the other
With
people?
the other people.
And so, eventually that will be, so it's kind of dropping like breadcrumbs along the way of like, well, we're looking into their medical charts. What's happened to them in the
Right.
past? Like,
Right.
have
But there's
they,
so much data, right? Like, I mean,
yeah,
there's so much data on a person's life and what thing is relevant.
And what things in my book did your mom never tell you?
Right. Oh, that's good. Love it. Love
So,
it.
like, that's that's what it ends up being. The big giveaway is his mom never told him that this happened in his life, and so it's the guy that's running the experiment didn't ever pull his medical record because he didn't tell anyone he had given himself the shot.
Right.
So then it's, then they are basically, as one would be in a novel, the government says, all right, we have to distribute this to the world now that we've figured this out.
Right.
And and they're of course like, we're not going to tell anybody that we have superpowers. Like, there's
Right.
only two
Right.
of us out of like 1,000 have it, so we should be fine.
We should be fine.
And of
Oh,
course,
that could be interesting.
as things happen in a book, things go downhill very quickly.
Right, right. Because books are logical, right?
Yeah.
They're always logical. There's cause and effect, and it goes down. You don't
Yeah.
end up as many random, like you have to explain everything and it has to make sense. It has to make sense for your world, the rules of your world as you've built them.
So, do you plan your books out ahead of time or do you fly by
I
the
am
seat
a
of your pants?
I'm a pantser. Okay, so I figured out recently that I am a pantser up to a certain point,
Mhm.
and then my brain freaks out, and then I have to figure out everything. So like this, yeah,
So you
it's
start
yeah.
writing and then you
I
go,
just start
crap, where do I go
writing,
next?
right? I keep writing, and then my brain, like I was telling you about, like being stuck. So the current mouse, I'm working on mouse right now, and there's this part that has to happen, and I'm really struggling with, well, what direction should it go? And when I what I recognized was I didn't understand. Okay, I'm gonna back up. I do really complicated things in my head for these books. And so I
Okay.
have like this causal, because it's a time travel book, the original Ravenne had a thing that she did that caused her to come up with like meet aliens and caused her to do all this other kind of jazz. And then it caused infighting. And then there's another version of her. And then there's another version of her and
Okay.
another version. Right. And so I had to kind of understand what all the different players were doing because it's all supposed to come together in that book.
Yeah.
So I ended up having to sort of plot out all these different, not the specifics necessarily, but what their motivation was.
Yeah.
What did they want? What did the alien that had his civilization destroyed want? Well,
Yeah.
right? Was it to go home? Was it to, and then you start asking more questions. So
Yeah.
I do pants it up to a point and then I have to plot. I think
Yeah,
that calls me a
mine.
plotzer, a
So,
planter.
mythology book, I have like the overall, I haven't even started like
Okay.
plotting that one yet. I have like a general idea of like main plot points I know I want to have.
Yep.
The other book I have like, I want this to happen and this to happen and this to happen um in my head. But then
Do
I
your
had
characters fight it? Because sometimes I have that and then my characters fight it and they're like, no, I don't want to do that.
I haven't had that happen yet. No
Okay.
one's fought any. I haven't gotten to any so far. It's still the like it hasn't gone worldwide and they still haven't figured out like
Okay.
why they both have it. So that's going to be like a huge thing later on.
Yeah.
Um but the at the beginning, like my prologue, it's like a snippet from later in the book, a very short like 3-paragraph snippet from later in the book.
Yeah.
And so and I kept it short for a reason. And it could go longer as I keep writing the book. I had one author I showed it to, and he was like, it's such a short prologue. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Some people hate prologues. Absolutely
I'm
hate
like,
them.
it's a snippet from later in the book. If someone chooses not to read the prologue, it's still later in the book, so it's fine.
Right.
But then it was like the first chapter is 6 weeks later, so I had to kind of plot to make sure I knew where have we made it to 6 weeks
Right.
yet? Because I didn't want to
Right.
be like, we're going to go over every day of their lives for the next 6 weeks. No,
Right. When
like a
nothing's
week after
happening.
this or 3 days later, or like whatever.
Right.
Skip chunks of time. You don't need to go over every single minute of their lives for the
And please
next
don't.
6 weeks.
So new authors
No,
out there, please, dear God, don't.
right? No. And my husband's working on his book, and his is also superheroes. But his is they're like in this college class or whatever. And so he's like going over like the classes and the schedule. So for the first couple chapters, it makes sense that you are following them for the first couple days of classes because
Right.
in a college setting, typically your classes are going to change from day to day.
Right.
But then he skips time because you don't need to follow the same 5 classes or
Right.
however many
Right.
classes
Because a
over and
month
over and
later is when
over.
the inciting incident happens that makes
Yeah.
everything. Yeah.
So jump to,
Yeah.
a week before the exciting incident happened or a couple days before and be like,
Yep.
here's what led to that happening.
Yep. Yep.
So that's something I feel like is a good tip. I mean, you need to know where your book is going to an
Yes.
extent.
Yes.
Otherwise, why are you writing?
Yes.
What is your story? What was the idea what was your dream that you're trying to solve?
Right. And even the pantsers, what I've heard, the way it's represented in some of the other people that I talk to is more like it's like you've got your hunk of clay and there's a statue underneath it. And so you're feeling your way to the thing that you're doing. So you do still have an end goal. You just might not be consciously aware of it. I always am. I'm like, oh, I think this is what's gonna happen. I'm aiming for this. Woohoo!
I don't know if you've seen Golden Angel on TikTok. She said, when I talked to her, she said she had one book where she plans out all of her books, but she has one where she ended up putting the plan up on her Patreon because her plan changed, like the actual book and the plan look nothing alike. So she's
Oh,
like,
fun.
here's what this book was supposed to be.
Yep.
Not
But that's
anything
good
like
for her
that.
embracing it, right? I mean, she
Yeah,
probably made a fabulous book when, done. Like the plan would have been great and she came up with something even better, probably.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's some where you're like, I know that this needs, like, eventually in my book, they're going to have to figure out why the people are getting superpowers. Like, that's
Right.
just it has to happen when you're dealing with a what's this giant mystery thing.
Yep.
Um, but the how and why they find out can constantly change.
Yes.
So,
Yep. That's the anchoring event. Yeah. Or like I'll do something where I'll be 3/4 of the way through the book and something happens and I realize that there was something there that hadn't been mentioned before. The MacGuffin, whatever it is, the ray gun, the test results, whatever, right? And so you have to go back and be like, all right, chapter 3 means I need to set it up. Chapter 4, I need to make sure that it gets
yeah.
seen. Chapter 5, I need to make sure, whatever, so that it works and it's not just a boom, there it is,
Yeah.
that it makes sense in the context of the story.
Well, and that's where, drafts 2, 3, 4, 500 come into play
Yes.
because you have to, when you go back and read through it, you realize, oh crap, I changed the eye color halfway through the
Right.
book.
I had
Or
disappearing dogs. We called them the teleporting dogs. So these dogs were super central to them. And then for the next 2 chapters, they were gone. And then they showed up again. I reread it and I had the editor go, so teleporting dogs, like what happened to them? Were they just like, I was like, oh, whoops.
I've had a couple of I'm working on, or I just finished an audiobook today. And as I was reading through the book, I was like, hey, I have a question about, whatever. And he says, because I'm very upfront with my authors, if it's going to give away something in a later book, I don't want to know about it right now. You can just
Right.
say that's, plot spoiler. And so like a couple times I'll be like, hey, what's going on with this? Because like, do I need to know something about this later on that's going to help me, narrate this better? If it's
Right.
going to help me narrate it, then I have to know the answer. If
Yep.
it's just, that's going to totally ruin it, just narrate it however you want to, then I'll do it that way. But
Yep.
I've had a few where it's like, who is this random character that's on the phone for like 2 sentences and then he disappears? Like, who is that character? Because it felt like a really important part,
Right.
but then he's not in any of the rest of the book.
Yep.
So,
And what did they say? Were they like, oh,
yeah, it was, oh, this is his name. He shows up. This particular series that I'm working on is a series of interconnected series. And so it's like he's in like the next
ah,
series. He's like one of the main
yep,
characters.
yep. They do that a lot in romances too, where they try to
Yeah.
get you interested in the side characters so you'll read the rest of the books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, it's a
that's,
great tactic.
I mean, he's like a hitman. So he says like, I'm looking at the targets, or like, some big
Read
like,
something,
I'm
ooh,
clearly a
intriguing.
hitman. But like what he was saying, I was like, it was so specific that I'm like, does this
Right,
matter or does this not matter? Is this just like a random hitman or is he important
right.
later? Like,
Yeah,
what should his voice sound like? Sometimes I
right.
have to ask when I only have 3 sentences.
3 sentences, right. Because you don't want to get it wrong and have, the next time they're like, wait a minute, how did Whiny Butt turn into this, alpha guy?
Yeah. I had that happen with a book where she was like, the author at the end was like, why did you give the character this like bubbly blonde voice? Like she's going to end up in the later books like the boss of the organization, and I said, you described her as not wanting to get dirty and thinking that everyone was yucky, and she was blonde and bubbly. Like,
Did you have to redo all of that, or did she just
no.
make it work? Okay.
No, because she was like, can we bring her voice down closer to the main character? And I said, we can't make them sound the same. They're in too many scenes together. Like,
Right. That's true.
the
Yeah,
main
that's true.
character has to stay the main character, and
Yep.
she's just going to have to be the blonde, bubbly person. You can make her a little bit, rougher later on, but
Right.
like, her voice needs to be unique because she's a main character.
Yeah.
So part of the job.
Yeah,
occasionally
I
you gotta
bet.
occasionally you gotta talk the author down for like, that requires almost re-recording the entire book.
Right, and you should have caught that sooner, right? Because 'Cause don't you do voice demos for each of the characters where you actually have, like, little snippets for each of the characters so that they can,
I
um
do not typically
okay,
for all the characters. I'll do like the first 15 minutes of a book, which that character was in the first 15 minutes of the book.
there you go. Okay,
But yeah, it's called, so I get most of my work from ACX, and for that one,
okay,
it's called a first 15. I typically just do the first 15 minutes because I've already auditioned with the piece that they thought was this is the piece that's going to make or break the narrator for this book. I've already auditioned with that piece. So,
right.
like, but yeah, the rest of the characters, I mean, as long as it makes sense. And I'll tell authors, like, I will up to a point, but you wrote your characters a certain way, and I took notes as I read for how you described these characters.
Right.
And then you get, as a narrator, you get where, the main character is normally going to have my voice, and the main male character is going to have a slightly lower version of my voice. And like, the
Right.
bubbly blonde is going to have this particular voice, and the old man is going to sound like this. Like, you just get in your
Yep,
little lanes of
yep,
characters described a certain way are going to sound a certain
a
way.
certain way. I mean, as they should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you listen to all of my audiobooks back to back, it's going to sound very repetitive because I use the same voices a lot.
It's like you only have one voice.
I
Right?
know. I know. It's like my voice is my voice.
Is your voice. Like, what's up with that?
So as an author, what is a piece of advice you wish you had gotten before you started writing?
So the thing that I wish that I would have known before I started writing, so that it's a little bit complex, but it really, well, there's two. Okay, so the first one is you are who you are, and the way that you do things isn't necessarily wrong. So being a pantser or being a plotter or being needing to walk and talk about your book or having to write on a journals or doing a big painting, like whatever your process is, it's you, and embrace
Mm-hmm.
it and use it. And don't do a plot because someone told you that's the only way to do a book, right? Like
Right.
find your path and then do the things that feel good that keep you moving forward. Try lots of things, right? And then find your thing and then do it.
Mm-hmm.
And don't let somebody tell you that there's only one way of completing a book because that's kind of BS. Besides,
Yeah.
like, right? That's so that would be the first thing. And the second thing is a little bit weirder, like that different genres have different expectations, right? So a
Mm-hmm.
romance has a different expectation on what the voice is and everything else. A mystery has a different expectation. Nonfiction has a different expectation. So if you have something that you're writing that's a fantasy, say, and you give it to a mystery reader to get feedback on, you're going to get mystery reader feedback, right?
Right.
You're not going to get fantasy reader feedback. And so making sure that you are getting the appropriate feedback from the appropriate set, like who your reader is, I think is super important.
Well, and that's as
So,
simple as asking, do you like to read
do
this
you
genre?
like? Right, right. But not even thinking of asking that it's just feedback and all feedback is good feedback. I mean, I think,
If they
kind
hate
of
fantasy, it's not going to be
right. Or
helpful.
you're a nonfiction author and you're trying to give, fantasy feedback. Like that's not necessarily helpful because
Yeah.
there's different expectations. So, yeah.
Yeah, there
So
was
those would be my two.
an author I talked to that her editor that she used didn't like her genre.
Oh my God.
So I'm like, yeah, so when she has it edited as she should, she puts it up and all the reviews were like, "Oh gosh, this is terribly edited. It needs work on it, whatever." And
Right,
then she finds out he doesn't even like her genre. So
right.
I'm like, but as an
It
editor, that should have been made clear.
Yeah, it should have been.
Also, if you're editing a book is still a book.
But
So,
there's different expectations, like, mystery readers I figured out were much more like they expect things to be very precise, right? They want to see, and so there's a lot of precise. And romance readers, as long as you can like get them caught by the people and wanting to know what's going on, they will give you a lot of rope.
but if you're the editor on that, sentence structure is still sentence
That's
structure. Like,
true. That's true. But there's also like artistic things where you have your fragments when you're supposed
yeah,
to, and you've got your maybe not comma splices. You're really not supposed to do that. But there's things that you would do, that are for because it sounds good instead of instead of
right.
grammatically good.
When I saw one author or one editor talked about like you should learn the rules of like how it's supposed to be, and then you can bend or break the rules
Yep.
based, if they need to be
If they
bended or
need to be
broken for your
right.
book. Because not every book, if every single book had exactly perfect grammar structure, we would all be bored to death. Like,
Yes, we absolutely would. Yep. Agreed.
well, that is pretty good advice. Because, yeah, I never thought about, I mean, I just sit on my couch and type. Um, but I guess some people, I think heard of one author that was like painted a painting and then that inspired a book.
Yep. I've got a girlfriend that I do sprints with, and she periodically will do like hand puppet plays. Like she'll do like hand puppet plays for her scene because she wants to figure out where the people are and like do like the mental blocking, and having puppets helps her. And she
I
writes
think
some amazing stuff, right? So I'm like, hey, it totally works.
I may have narrated a romance that would have benefited from sock puppet position help.
Was the third arm come? Did the third arm come with no alien?
No, no, no. The position that the female ended up in would have been incredibly uncomfortable for the things happening in the scene. And I'm
Oh,
like, maybe we didn't try to picture in our heads what it would be like if her arms were like strapped behind her, not like up above her head, like sitting in an
ooh,
upward position with her arms like stretched out behind her. I'm like, that would have been
ooh,
so painful in
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Like, doesn't
yeah.
matter how in the moment you are, that would have been
Right.
incredibly painful. So- and I had to read the scene like 3 times to make sure like I wasn't just reading it wrong.
You're like, what? Again, the commentary would have been like, pause. What the heck? Did this work? Like with the
Exactly.
visuals for those
Exactly.
words.
You're like, "Did I read that right? Okay, they were in this position, and then
Yep.
they moved like that, and then
Can
they
you
did
imagine?
that next."
Honey,
Nope,
I need
nope.
your help. Come on.
So sock puppets. We're
Sock
gonna
puppets
puppet shows to figure out
to figure out. Yep.
logistics.
Yep. Yep. She totally does that. And it's awesome.
I've heard a couple authors say they'll watch spicy videos to
Oh,
figure out if things are possible.
right.
Is that an actual thing? Let's Google it.
Let's Google it. Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh, I feel like you could end up in some really creepy rabbit holes.
Oh, I know. People like so many different things. And so there you go.
Yeah.
And we're both probably like, I know I'm like, my face is totally red right now.
I'm in a hot closet, so like
Oh, I like that. I'm in the hot closet too. That's why my face is red, not because I'm embarrassed.
that's happened a couple times while I've been on like lives. People be like, "Why is your face getting so red?" And I'm like, "It's totally because I'm in a really hot closet, not because I'm narrating a spicy scene and like 100 of you are watching me do
Right.
this."
Going, poop, where's the fan?
In the floorboard, but it's very quiet, so it doesn't move air very fast. All right, well, I think we are about done, and you just
Cool.
gave your tips, so I'm not going to ask if you have any final tips because you just did that. So, I want to say thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you
This
so
was
much for having me. Yeah.
this was a lot of fun.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Claudia liked Aesop's fables growing up. Aesop's Fables, or the Aesopica, is a collection of fables credited to Aesop, a slave and storyteller believed to have lived in ancient Greece between 620 and 564 BCE. Of diverse origins, the stories associated with his name have descended to modern times through a number of sources, and continue to be reinterpreted in different verbal registers, and in popular as well as artistic media. The fables originally belonged to oral tradition and were not collected for some 3 centuries after Aesop's death. By that time, a variety of other stories, jokes, and proverbs were being ascribed to him, although some of that material was from sources earlier than him, or came from beyond the Greek cultural sphere. The process of inclusion has continued until the present, with some of the fables unrecorded before the late Middle Ages, and others arriving from outside Europe. The process is continuous, and new stories are still being added to the Aesop corpus, even when they are demonstrably more recent work and sometimes from known authors. Manuscripts in Latin and Greek were important avenues of transmission, although poetical treatments in European vernaculars eventually formed another. On the arrival of printing, collections of Aesop's fables were among the earliest books in a variety of languages. Through the means of later collections and translations or adaptations of them, Aesop's reputation as a fabulist was transmitted throughout the world. Initially, the fables were addressed to adults and covered religious, social, and political themes. They were also put to use as ethical guides, and from the Renaissance onwards were particularly used for the education of children. Their ethical dimension was reinforced in the adult world through depiction in sculpture, painting, and other illustrative means, as well as adaptation to drama and song. In addition, there have been reinterpretations of the meaning of fables and changes in emphasis over time. Today we'll be reading The Lion and the Hare, one of Aesop's fables. Don't forget, we're reading Les Morts d'Arthur, the story of King Arthur and of his noble knights of the Round Table on our Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes. The Lion and the Hare. A lion came across a hare, who was fast asleep. He was just in the act of seizing her when a fine young hart trotted by, and he left the hare to follow him. The hare, scared by the noise, awoke and scudded away. The lion was unable, after a long chase, to catch the hart, and returned to feed upon the hare. On finding that the hare also had run off, he said, "I'm rightly served, for having let go of the food that I had in my hand for the chance of obtaining more." Thank you for joining Freya's Fairy Tales. We'll be taking a break for the holidays for the next couple of weeks, but sign up for our newsletter and we look forward to seeing you in 2023.